During the Great Depression of the late 1920s and into the 30s, people in the United States were shaken by several catastrophes. Savings vanished as banks failed. Farmers' crops were lost to drought. Unemployment and despair spread through the country as veterans, older Americans, children, disabled people, and the poor and working class fought to survive. Presidents Herbert Hoover and Franklin D. Roosevelt both offered relief programs, some more successful than others. And in 1935, the Social Security Act was signed into law by FDR, but only after much agitation by elderly citizens especially. And even then, some felt that Social Security and other relief measures fell woefully short. The following letters not only criticize FDR's Social Security, they seek to draw the Roosevelts' attention to inequalities in relief distribution, which, throughout the Great Depression, favored the haves over the have-nots. Welcome to History in Letters and Memoirs Great Depression series. This collection intends to be a living history that draws from two books, Down and Out in the Great Depression, Letters from the Forgotten Man by Robert S. McIlvaine, and Dear Mrs. Roosevelt, Letters from Children of the Great Depression by Robert Cohen. Each installment in this series features a selection of letters organized by topic, with a few excerpts from Cohen, McIlvaine, and other sources to provide additional context. Although these letters were written almost a century ago, their content feels unnervingly close. Because Cohen and McIlvaine have taken great care to faithfully transcribe each letter as it was written, every letter is displayed on screen as it is read. Images from the time period accompany the text. I try my best to read word for word, but at times I make minor changes to language and sentence structure. I claim sole responsibility for any mistakes in interpretation. Likewise, cadence and tone of voice are my subjective attempt to convey the deep feeling with which 1930s Americans wrote to their presidents and politicians, sharing their lives, their despair, their hope, and their need. Mrs. F. D. Roosevelt. Dear friend and lady of the White House, I am asking you a few questions in regard to the way they are doing down here about the relief ward. We have a family of 8 children and have got nothing to live on and can't get any kind from the government. We go over to Miami and talk to them. They just make fun of us and laugh and say, "We will see that you are taken care of." But they never do anything. We have always tried to get by without help. The drought last year and this year has put us where we can't feed our family and clothe them. They told us to live off 25 hens and 3 cows, with no feed to feed them. We are all barefooted, and no clothes to wear, and cannot send our children to school. They put us off the relief in July, and my husband can't get back on. But there is men that has got enough to make a living without it. We have got nothing to sell. It is hard to try and feed 8 children on bread and milk, and part of the time, no bread. There is several families in this community in the same shape we are in. The only ones they will help is the ones that can ride in fine cars. The poor class of people down here is treated like dogs. There is about 50 in office in Miami. They are the ones that are living fat. There is one girl in office from our community. Her father is a big farmer and holds 2 jobs. One job is boss on the relief, and one county road job. My girls asked for an office job, as they told them they couldn't make their board, and they can't do the same work she is doing. I would like to know how us poor people can get any help, if there is any share for us in government help. Visit Miami dressed like us poor people and ask for help, and see how you are talked to for yourself. Yours truly, Mrs. F. O.S. Miami, Oklahoma, November 15th, 1935. Mr. Harry L. Hopkins, Works Progress Administrator Director, Washington, D.C. Dear Sir, I seen in the press some time ago a notices inserted notifying WPA workers would be discharged if caught loafing while on the job. I wish to inquire if you meant to include the WPA office's staff. I visited about all the office staffs in Upper Michigan and found that was about all they was doing. Sitting around telling stories, smoking cigarettes, with their feet stuck up on the desk having a good time. Do you think that a man of the age of 60 or 70 years old can do the work that a man can do at the age of 25? He cannot. He would collapse. When old age creeps upon you, you come in contact with all kinds of ailments. Aches, pains, nervousness, sleepless and sightless. There is now 60% of the WPA workers over 60 years old. The younger class seems to forget their forefathers and deny the old age the $200 a month old age pension, something that would give the old age a little pleasure for the last few years that they have to live. Such pension plan is the only thing that will bring back this country to normal and prosperity, a decent living and living wages. The forefathers of this nation built schools and colleges to educate the younger class that is now in power, and now, by that class, are refused a decent living. They forget old age, mother and father, and gray hair. Why should we be in need in the midst of plenty? Our public servants is the cause of that, no one else. Remember that old age, gray hair, and death will catch up with you, and nothing leaves this earth. The $200 old age pension plan of Townsend and Reverend Coughlin's social justice plan is the only plan that will restore this nation to prosperity, and who disputes it is not telling the truth. Robert S. McIlvaine notes in his book, Down and Out in the Great Depression, that, quote, although the fact is often ignored, it should be noted that discontent and rebelliousness were no monopoly on the left. Indeed, these basic feelings are without ideological content. The existence of rebellious Americans of the racist and proto-fascist rather than the egalitarian stripe should not be overlooked. The career of Father Coughlin makes the point well. At the height of his popularity, the radio priest's criticisms seemed to be of a leftist nature. Later in the decade, however, it became clear that Coughlin was an anti-Semitic supporter of Hitler. As his views became more plain, Coughlin lost most of his followers. While this is comforting to those of us who would prefer not to find much potential for fascism in the United States, some consideration ought to be given to those rebellious Americans who actually were proto-fascists. If the WPA would set prevailing wages for 8 hours, no, they cut wages for the industry. Why? Because the industry man said, if you don't want to work for $42 a month, go back to the WPA. Do you call that prosperity? Labor is the foundation of the world. You cannot exist without it. The man that works with the shovel is worth more than you fellows are because you produce nothing. Here is an example of 5 in a family. The head of the family gets $42 on the WPA. Will you allow them 25 cents each day to live on, a total of $1.25 per day for 1 month, 31 days, a total of $38.75. Will you allow for rent? $6. Will you allow for light? $1. Will you allow for wood? $3. Will you allow for water? 75 cents. Will you allow for wearable effects? $3. Expense? $52.50. A total of $52.50. Credit, $42. $10.50 in debt. Attack pair. Menastique, Michigan, March 12, 1936. Dear Mr. Roosevelt, my soul shall not rest in peace until the last bit of slavery is removed from the land and righteousness abide therein. Even now the oppressors are digging their own graves. You have the power to replace the dirt into the graves of your entire family, if you care to. These things the people realize from suffering and are teaching their children. 1. The rich are the laziest people in the world. 2. They rear their children to be oppressors. 3. They never do anything for the uplift of suffering humanity. 4. They make the laws to suit their own pocketbooks. 5. They create wars and send the innocent out to fight for them. 6. They drain the world of the little money that is left in it. 7. They make life miserable for every man, woman, and child. 8. The laws of the land are being misused. How can you, having never faced a real gun, eat the best foods and sleep in the finest bed, while the sons of men who risked their lives to save this country lay dying with their families for the want of food, clothing, shelter? J. Asbury Park, New Jersey, August 3rd, 1935. Honorable President and Mrs. Roosevelt, Washington, D.C. Dear friends, a few words from one whom you represent. When President Roosevelt gave his promise to drive the money changers from the temple, listeners had hope that at last the common people of the nation would have a hearing. But so far he seems zealously to be watching over the interests of financiers and capitalists, and the common people are allowed to view a mirage with wonderful promises which disappear on approach. They are, however, not deceived, which you would fully realize if you visited their quarters in almost any large city. President Roosevelt's security program is ridiculed, and to all of us it is a great disappointment. Common people have maintained the morale of this nation, and not the visitors to Reno or those sitting in cocktail hotels. Uncle Sam had millions to spend to destroy food and cotton, but a paltry $50 a month for 3.5 million working men to maintain a home and family in decency and health, and 49.5 cents a day for the aged, to keep up the old home, but coal, food, and clothing, after all of these have been raised to highest prices by him. We all know streams of money have been steadily flowing into Wall Street from all corners of this nation, and it is by the federal government alone, which has access to all of these treasuries, that old age pensions should be paid. It is Wall Street that has made corners and pools in stock markets, creating holding companies, Samuel Insulls and Henry L. Dohertys, with money for skyscrapers and every conceivable luxury. Samuel Insull was a British-American utilities magnate whose mighty fortune grew in the early 20th century and collapsed in 1934. According to Chicagology, quote, Insull was master of the most gigantic chain of public utilities ever controlled by one man. His hundreds of electric plants, gas plants, water plants, ice plants, streetcar lines, bus lines, and electric railroads dotted the map from Maine to Texas and overflowed into Canada and Mexico. His varied enterprises operated in 32 states, served more than 5,000 cities, towns, and villages, had supplied the public utility needs of approximately 15 million persons. Insull kept his money in a pyramid of more than 100 holding companies worth billions. They eventually collapsed, triggering several fraud investigations of Insull, who had fled to Europe to escape fraud charges, but who was extradited, charged, and later acquitted. Owners of stock in Insull's companies saw their shares drop from $160 per share in 1929 to 12.5 cents by 1932. Many owners of Insull stock were ruined. The collapse of the Insull empire will go down in history as the greatest failure in American business annals. It was 10 times bigger than the Kroger collapse in Europe. Henry Latham Doherty was another utilities magnate, as well as an oil tycoon. Born in Columbus, Ohio in 1870, he later formed the city's service holding company to acquire utility firms, which grew to control more than 200 entities. But no money to pay interest to honest people who paid their $100 per share with the promise to get this interest monthly as old age pension. There is as much wealth as ever, but where is it? In the hands of a comparatively few, and most of them in Wall Street. Why cannot President Roosevelt understand the people know this and are demanding a redistribution of wealth instead of a program of debts for unborn generations to pay? Why is he not taxing the fountainheads of this wealth if he means business? Not borrow $4.8 billion to pay workers at starvation wages and have most of it go to political overlords. Closed banks with receivers who know nothing about banking yet get $4,000 a year or more because they are Democratic politicians and eating up assets of depositors who are in want. The Townsend Plan, while it looked like a fairy tale or a millennium at first, yet as we think of it and examine its details, we believe it is workable if really tried. It does not put all the wealth in one hand to distribute as he sees fit, as a Hitler or Mussolini giving him all power, and why ask it? But it distributes it from all corners of the nation from which it was filched, by means our government should have outlawed before birth. Not even a large amount to any one person at any given time, but honest people who have lost as heavily as the 60 or 65-year-olds have, can much more be depended upon to spend the $200 a month justly than any youthful politician I know. Together with whatever income the recipient already has, to be paid by local banks on a percent basis, will help the banks as well as the workers of every industry, and this pension should be given to every industrious citizen of the U.S. for the past 10 or more years. Pauper pensions tend to break down self-respect. We know many who have lost practically everything through no fault of their own, would rather die than have to declare themselves penniless. Also, this plan also does not place a great debt on the nation for another generation to pay, but can be paid by a general transaction tax on funds in the hands of this generation. It is stated on good authority that one bank alone in New York City has annual clearings amounting into billions. 2% tax would not impoverish them, yet do an enormous amount of good, and considering the many banks of the nation beside many other sources of such a tax, there is not a doubt but the necessary sum could readily be raised, especially if it was to be used for armament or to protect the wealthy in nation. Of course, the wealthy and insurance companies are the chief objectors. However, the 8 million or more dispensers of $200 or more a month would put new life into all industries and help the whole nation by supplying work, and its reaction would be a benefit even to the wealthy. In his thesis, Thunder Without Lightning, Working Class Discontent in the United States, 1929 through 1937, historian Robert S. McIlvaine writes that supporters of the Townsend Plan tended to be small business owners, generally middle class, whose prejudices would go largely unchallenged if the Townsend Plan were enacted. Quote, "The Townsendites were, in a word, respectable. The first resolution passed at the first Townsend Convention in 1935 was a rule against smoking in the auditorium. Townsend speakers showed their bourgeois values when they said the plan would make jobs for young people and take them out of their cigarette-smoking, whiskey-drinking, roadside-petting hell of idleness. Just how many of the young wanted to be rescued from this inferno was questionable. The greatest fallacy of the Townsend Plan was thinking that the economy could be balanced through a redistribution of income among the poor. If the plan had been financed through a tax on wealth instead of one on consumption, it might have been feasible. But recovery could never be brought about, as the New Deal's own Social Security program would show, by taking from one disadvantaged group to give to another. For low wages by government make large profits possible by capitalists, and does not redistribute wealth, which must be done if we are ever to secure prosperity. Mass production requires mass selling, and mass selling requires mass buying, and mass buying requires purchasing power in the hands of the masses, and it is the failure to provide this purchasing power that has wrecked our economic machine. Townsend Plan places power into the hands of the masses. It is useless to raise prices and then give masses no purchasing power. It simply makes living more impossible. A man's intelligence is judged by the rapidity by which he can adjust himself to a new situation, and a nation's intelligence is judged by the rapidity its leaders can adjust themselves to a new order. We are in a new era or order, machines replacing human hands by the million. Hours of labor per day and also years of labor must be decreased, but how shall the enormous profits of past years be distributed to those whose earning days are past and their years of industry all for naught because of unscrupulous racketeers? This U.S. could be a paradise, instead the habitation of misery and want, if leaders would let go of selfish interests. Sincerely, Mrs. O. M., Ypsilanti, Michigan, January 24th, 1936. Creating a living history is not without expense. If you would like to support the channel, please consider making a donation. I've put a link in the description. You can also support by hitting the like button, subscribing and turning on notifications so you don't miss a video, and dropping a comment below on which letter catches your attention and why. Turn to the person next to you and tell them what caught your attention and why. Ask them for their perspective. Listen, respond, connect, continue. Thank you for keeping this history alive. Apart from assistance in creating a caption file, History in Letters and Memoir is an AI-free channel. Mrs. Franklin D. Roosevelt. Dear Lady, will you please warn the people of what's going to happen in America if these property owners don't quit making industrial slaves out of their laborers and working them on starvation wages, paying them a wage whereby they cannot obtain the desires of life, or else installing machinery and laying the common laborer off his job to starve to death? We don't want a revolution in this country where innocent men, women, and children will be shot down without mercy like they are doing in Spain and also like they did in Russia. We want peace on earth, goodwill toward men. You know, Mrs. Roosevelt, with the majority of us poor people, we desire good things as well as the higher classes of society. For instance, we desire a nice home to live in, with sanitary surroundings. We desire a nice refrigerator, electric stove, fan, nice furniture, radio, a nice car with money to take a vacation. But one cannot have these desires of life at a wage of $8, $10, or $12 per week. And if we could not accumulate no money and would have to go on being industrial slaves, and our children would fall under the same yoke of bondage that we and our foreparents were under, and never be considered no more than an ordinary slaves. After all, it is natural with any human being to want to obtain the desires of life with the least physical exertion possible. But the great majority of the men that wear the overalls and are forced by the taskmaster or property holder to exert their bodies strenuously every day do not even get proper and sufficient food to maintain their bodies while at work. When man, woman, or child fail to get proper and sufficient food to maintain their bodies, they are gradually starving to death, and become so weak and run down that some disease develops, and they die. How many little children in America that are failing to get sufficient milk, even to maintain their little bodies? I can see little children all around me looking hollow-eyed, peaked-faced, for the simple reason that they are not getting proper food. Mrs. Roosevelt, can we believe for a minute that our young men and young women that are growing up, being educated from an 8th grade to a college education, educating themselves especially on the economical conditions of the world, are going to be willing to become industrial slaves on starvation wages? This alone will bring on a revolution if it is not remedied. There would not be so many crimes committed if every man and boy were out from under bondage of hard labor and were getting the desires of life. We have plenty of young Don Gillingers, Pretty Boy Floyds, Jesse James roaming all over our land today wanting jobs, desiring to marry and settle down and live a comfortable life, and cannot get hold of enough money to buy a marriage license. And the next thing we know, they strike back at the ones that are responsible for being in that condition. Mrs. Roosevelt, this nation is hanging over a giant powder keg just waiting for someone to light a match. You see, I am forced to mingle with the poorer classes, and I hear what they have to say. As far as I am concerned, I don't believe in taking the carnal weapon against my fellow man. Therefore, all I can do is stand still and see the salvation of the Lord. I am 34 years old, married, and have one daughter. I have an 8th grade education. I got a job last week as a laborer on the new courthouse here, although I am a painter by trade, and just because I am a little crippled on my right side, the contractor would not work me. He said the insurance company would not allow him to. And so I cannot see a very bright prospect in life, although my wife slaves in a cotton mill, but I want a job so as I can get her out of it, for I'm afraid she has contracted tuberculosis. Hoping an answer, I remain yours sincerely, D.B.P. Nashville, Tennessee, August 15th, 1936. Many thanks to the historians and archivists whose painstaking work preserves our history. Many more thanks to the forgotten men, women, and children from the Depression era whose words reach through time, offering wisdom and warning.